Hello. Um, I'm trying to do the lighting. I don't quite know how this is going to work. It's like Steven Spielberg in here, like Raiders of the Lost Ark or something. Oh, good Lord, that's bright. Um, I'm not quite sure how this is going to work. I may have to just, I don't know, put you on the ceiling or something because I don't know if I can hold this and do what I wanted to do. Anyway, I'll give it a go. And this is probably going to come out back to front, but life in the big city, what do you do? This is a book. Da-da. It's probably backwards, so yeah, that's about as good as you get. It's called The Five People You Meet in Heaven, and it's by Mitch Albom. And this is my favourite book. This is the book, oh good Lord, this is the book that I read that got me through the death of my mother and my father. So I thought if you're laid up with an injury, at some point you might like to listen to this, and maybe it would give you comfort, and maybe it would help you to feel a little bit better. So hang on, I've just got to get comfortable. You know how it is. Alrighty, let's give this a go. All righty. I'll see how far I get. I mean, the first chapters probably only take about 5 or 10 minutes. Okay, so it's The Five People You Meet in Heaven by Mitch Albom. This book is dedicated to Edward Beichman, my beloved uncle, who gave me my first concept of heaven. Every year around the Thanksgiving table, he spoke of a night in the hospital when he awoke to see the souls of his departed loved ones sitting on the edge of the bed, waiting for him. I never forgot that story, and I never forgot him. Everyone has an idea of heaven, as do most religions, and they should all be respected. The version represented here is only a guess, a wish in some ways that my uncle and others like him, people who felt unimportant here on earth, realise, finally, how much they mattered and how they were loved. The Five People You Meet in Heaven. Chapter 1 is called The End. This is a story about a man named Eddie, and it begins at the end, with Eddie lying in the sun and dying. It may seem strange to start a story with an ending, but all endings are also beginnings. We just don't know it at the time. The last hour of Eddie's life was spent, like most of the others, at Ruby Pier, an amusement park by a great grey ocean. The park had the usual attractions: a boardwalk, a Ferris wheel, roller coasters, bumper cars, a taffy stand, and an arcade where you could shoot streams of water into a clown's mouth. It also had a big new ride called Freddy's Freefall, and this would be where Eddie would be killed in an accident that would make newspapers around the state. At the time of his death, Eddie was a squat white-haired old man with a short neck, a barrel chest, thick forearms, and a faded army tattoo on his right shoulder. His legs were thin and veined now, his left knee wounded in the war, ruined by arthritis. He used a cane to get around. His face was broad and craggy from the sun, with salty whiskers and a lower jaw that protruded slightly, making him look prouder than he felt. He kept a cigarette behind his ear and a set of keys hooked to his belt. He wore rubber-soled shoes. He wore an old linen cap. His pale brown uniform suggested a working man, and a working man was what he was. Eddie's job was maintaining the rides, which really meant keeping them safe. Every afternoon he walked the park, checking on each attraction, from the tilt-a-wheel to the pipeline plunge. He looked for broken boards, loose bolts, worn-out steel. Sometimes he'd stop, his eyes glazing over, and people walking past thought something was wrong. But he was listening, that's all. After all these years, he could hear trouble, he said in the spits and sputters and thrumming of the equipment. With 50 minutes left on Earth, Eddie took his last walk along Ruby Pier. He passed an elderly couple. "Folks," he mumbled, touching his cap. They nodded politely. Customers knew Eddie, at least the regular ones did. They saw him summer after summer. He had one of those faces you associate with the place. His work shirt had a patch on the chest that said Eddie, above the word maintenance. And sometimes they'd say, "Hiya, Eddie Maintenance," although he never thought that that was funny. Today, it so happened, was Eddie's birthday, his 83rd. A doctor last week told him he had shingles. Shingles? Eddie didn't even know what they were. Once he'd been strong enough to lift a carousel horse in each arm, and that was a long time ago. "Eddie, take me, Eddie." 40 minutes until his death. Eddie made his way to the front of the roller coaster line. He rode every attraction at least once a week to be certain the brakes and the steering were solid. Today was Coaster Day. The Ghoster Coaster, they called this one. The kids who knew Eddie yelled to get in the cart with him. Children liked Eddie, not teenagers. Teenagers gave him headaches. Over the years, Eddie figured that he'd seen every sort of do-nothing, snarl-at-you teenager that there was. But children were different. Children looked at Eddie, who, with his protruding lower jaw, always seemed to be grinning, like a dolphin, and they trusted him. They drew in like the cold hands of a fire. They hugged his leg. They played with his keys. Eddie mostly grunted, never saying much. He figured it was because he didn't say much that they liked him. Now Eddie tapped two little boys with backward baseball caps. They raced to the cart and tumbled in. Eddie handed his cane to the ride attendant and slowly lowered himself between the two. "Here we go! Here we go!" one boy squealed as the other pulled Eddie's arm around his shoulders. Eddie lowered the bar and clack, 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 up they went. A story went around about Eddie when he was a boy growing up at this very same pier, that he got into an alley fight. 5 kids from Pittican Avenue had cornered his brother Joe and were about to give him a beating. Eddie was a block away on a stoop, eating a sandwich. He heard his brother scream. He ran to the alley, grabbed a garbage can lid and sent 2 boys to the hospital. After that, Joe didn't talk to him for months. He was ashamed. Joe was the oldest, the firstborn, but it was Eddie who did the fighting. "Can we go again, Eddie, please?" 34 minutes to live. Eddie lifted the lap bar, gave each boy a sucking candy, retrieved his cane, and then limped to the maintenance shop to cool down from the summer heat. Had he known his death was imminent, he might have gone somewhere else. Instead, he did what we all do. He went about his dull routine as if all the days in the world were still to come. One of the shop workers, a lanky, bony-cheeked young man called Dominguez, was by the solvent sink, wiping grease off a wheel. "Yo, Eddie," he said. "Dom," Eddie said. The shop smelled like sawdust. It was dark and cramped, with a low ceiling and pegboard walls that held drills and saws and hammers. Skeleton parts of fun park rides were everywhere. Compressors, engines, belts, light bulbs, the top of a pirate's head. Stacked against one wall were coffee cans of nails and screws, and stacked against another wall were endless tubs of grease. Greasing a track, Eddie would say, required no more brains than washing a dish. The only difference was you got dirtier as you did it, not cleaner. And that was the sort of work that Eddie did. Spread grease, adjusted brakes, tightened bolts, checked electrical panels. Many times he'd longed to leave this place, find different work, build another kind of life. But the war came. His plans never worked out. In time he found himself greying and wearing looser pants, and in a state of weary acceptance that he was who he was and who he would always be. A man with sand in his shoes in a world of mechanical laughter and grilled frankfurts. Like his father before him, like the patch on his shirt. Eddie was maintenance, the head of maintenance, or, as the kids sometimes called him, the ride man at Ruby Pier. "Hey, happy birthday, I hear," Dominguez said. Eddie grunted. "No party or nothing?" Eddie looked at him as if he were crazy. For a moment he thought about how strange it was to be growing old in a place that smelled of cotton candy. "Well, remember, Eddie, I'm off next week, starting Monday. Going to Mexico." Eddie nodded and Dominguez did a little dance. "Me and Teresa, going to see the whole family. Party. He stopped dancing when he noticed Eddie staring. You ever been? Dominguez said. Been to Mexico. Eddie inhaled through his nose. Kid, I never been anywhere I wasn't shipped with a rifle. He watched Dominguez return to the sink. He thought for a moment, and then he took a small wad of bills from his pocket, removed the only 20s he had, 2 of them, and he held them out. Get yourself and your wife something nice, Eddie said. Dominguez regarded the money and broke into a huge smile and said, Come on, man, you sure? Eddie pushed the money into Dominguez's palm, and then he walked out back to the storage area. A small fishing hole had been cut into the boardwalk planks years ago, and Eddie lifted the plastic cup. He tugged on a nylon line that dropped 80 feet into the sea. A piece of bologna was still attached. We catch anything? Dominguez yelled. Tell me we caught something. Eddie wondered how the guy could be so optimistic. There was never anything on that line, like ever. One day, Dominguez yelled. We're going to catch a halibut. Yeah, Eddie mumbled, although he knew you'd never pull a fish that big through a hole that small. 26 minutes to live. Eddie crossed the boardwalk to the south end, and business was slow. The girl behind the taffy counter was leaning on her elbows, popping her gum. Once Ruby Pier was the place to go in the summer. It had elephants and fireworks and marathon dance contests. But people didn't want to go to Ocean Piers much anymore. They went to theme parks where you paid $75 a ticket and had your photo taken with giant furry characters. Eddie limped past the bumper cars and fixed his eye on a group of teenagers leaning over the railing. Great, he thought to himself. Just what I need. Off, said Eddie, tapping the railing with his cane. Come on. It's not safe. The teens glared at him. The car poles sizzled with electricity. Zoop, zoop sounds. It's not safe, Eddie repeated. The teens looked at each other. One kid who wore a streak of orange in his hair sneered at Eddie and then stepped out onto the middle rail. Come on, dudes, hit me, he yelled, waving at the young drivers. Hit me! Eddie whacked the railing so hard with his cane he almost snapped it in two. Move it! The kids ran away. Another story went around about Eddie. As a soldier, he'd engaged in combat numerous times. He'd been brave, even won a medal. But towards the end of his service, he got into a fight with one of his own men, and that's how Eddie was wounded. Nobody knew what happened to the other guy, and nobody asked. With another 19 minutes left on Earth, Eddie sat for the last time in an old aluminium beach chair, his short-muscled arms folded like a seal's flippers against his chest. His legs were red from the sun, and his left knee still showed scars. In truth, much of Eddie's body suggested a survived encounter. His fingers were all bent at awkward angles, thanks to numerous fractures from assorted machinery. His nose had been broken several times in what he called saloon fights. His broadly jawed face might have been good-looking, well, once, the way a prize fighter might have looked before he took too many punches. Oh, that's better, I can see now. Now Eddie just looked tired. This was his regular spot at the Ruby Pier Boardwalk, behind the Jack Rabbit ride, which in the 80s was the Thunderbolt, which in the 70s was the Steel Eel, which in the 60s was the Lollipop Swings, which in the 50s was the Laugh in the Dark, which in the 40s was the Stardust Bandshell, which is where Eddie met Marguerite. Every life has one true love snapshot. For Eddie, it came on a warm September night after a thunderstorm, when the boardwalk was spongy with water. She wore a yellow cotton dress with a pink barrette in her hair. Eddie didn't say much. He was so nervous he felt as if his tongue was glued to his teeth. They danced to the music of the big band, Longlegs Delaney and his Everglades Orchestra. He brought her a lemon fizz. She said she had to go before her parents got angry. But when she walked away, she turned and she waved at him. That was the snapshot. For the rest of his life, whenever Eddie thought of Marguerite, Eddie would see that moment. Her waving over her shoulder, her dark hair falling over one eye, and he would feel that same arterial burst of love. That night he came home and he woke his older brother, and he said to him, "I've met the girl I'm going to marry." His brother groaned. "Go to sleep, Eddie." Ooh. A wave broke on the beach. Eddie coughed up something he did not want to see and spat it away. He used to think a lot about Marguerite. Not so much now. She was like a wound beneath an old bandage, and he'd grown more used to the bandage. Was that shingles? 16 minutes to live. No story sits by itself. Sometimes stories meet at corners. Sometimes they cover one another completely, like stones beneath a river. The end of Eddie's story was touched by another seemingly innocent story. Months earlier, a cloudy night when a young man arrived at Ruby Pier with 3 of his friends. The young man, whose name was Nicky, had just begun driving and was still not comfortable carrying a car key on a keychain. So he removed a single car key, put it in his jacket pocket, and tied the jacket around his waist. For the next few hours, he and his friends rode all the rides, all the fastest rides: the Flying Falcon, the Splashdown, Freddy's Freefall, the Ghoster Coaster. "Hands in the air," one of them yelled. They threw their hands in the air. Later, when it was dark, they returned to the car lot, exhausted and laughing, drinking beer from brown paper bags. Nicky reached into his jacket pocket. He fished around. He cursed. The car key was gone. 14 minutes until his death. Eddie wiped his brow with a handkerchief. Out on the ocean, diamonds of sunlight danced on the water, and Eddie stared at their nimble movement. He had not been right on his feet since the war. But back at the Stardust Bandshell with Marguerite, there Eddie had still been graceful. He closed his eyes and allowed himself to summon the song that brought them together. The one Judy Garland sang in the movie. It mixed in his head now with the cacophony of the crashing waves and the children screaming on the rides. "You made me love you. I didn't want to do it. Made me love you. Eee. This time you knew it, and all the knew it." Eddie felt her hands on his shoulders. He squeezed his eyes tightly to bring the memory closer. Not reading very well tonight. Excuse me. A young girl, maybe 8 years old, stood before him, blocking his sunlight. She had blonde curls and wore flip-flops and denim cut-off shorts and a lime green T-shirt with a cartoon duck on the front. Amy, he thought her name was. Amy or Annie. She'd been here a lot this summer, although Eddie never saw a mother or a father. "'Scuse me," she said again. "Eddie maintenance?" Eddie sighed. "Just Eddie," he said. "Eddie? Uh-huh. Can you make me..." She put her hands together as if praying. "Come on, kiddo, I don't have all day." "Can you make me an animal? Eddie, can you?" Eddie looked as if he had to think about it. Then he reached into his shirt pocket, pulled out 3 yellow pipe cleaners, which he carried just for this purpose. "Yes," the little girl said, clapping her hands. Eddie began twisting the pipe cleaners. "Where's your parents?" "Are riding the rides. Without you?" "My mum's with her boyfriend." "Oh." He bent the pipe cleaners into several small loops and twisted the loops around one another. His hands shook now, and it took longer than it used to. But soon the pipe cleaners resembled a head, ears, body, and a tail. "A rabbit," the little girl said. Eddie winked. "Thank you." She spun away, lost in that place where kids don't even know their feet are moving. Eddie wiped his brow again and closed his eyes, slumped into the beach chair and tried to get that old song back in his head. A seagull squawked as it flew overhead. You can hear my pussycat meowing outside the door. "Andy, go with Daddy. Go work on your novel. Go work on your novel, cat." How do people choose their final words? Do they realise their gravity? Are they fated to be wise? By his 83rd birthday, Eddie had lost nearly everyone that he'd cared about. Some had died young, some had been given a chance to grow old, before disease or an accident took them away. At their funerals, Eddie listened as mourners recalled their final conversations. It's as if he knew he was going to die, some would say. Eddie never believed that. As far as he could tell, when your time came, it came, and that was all that. You might say something smart on your way out, but you just might as easily say something absolutely stupid. For the record, Eddie's final words were, "Get back." Here are the sounds of Eddie's last minutes on Earth. Waves crashing, the distant thump of rock music, the whirring engine of a small biplane, dragging an ad from the tail, and this. "Oh my God, look!" Eddie felt his eyes dart beneath his lids. Over the years, he'd come to know every noise at Ruby Pier, and he could sleep through all of them like a lullaby. This voice was not in the lullaby. "Oh my God, look!" Eddie bolted upright. A woman with fat dimpled arms was holding a shopping bag and pointing and screaming. A small crowd gathered around her, their eyes to the sky. Eddie saw it immediately. Atop Freddy's Freefall, the new tower drop attraction, one of the carts was tilted at an angle, as if trying to dump its cargo. 4 passengers, 2 men and 2 women, held only by a safety bar, were grabbing frantically at anything they could. "Oh my God," the fat woman yelled. "Those people, they're gonna fall." A voice squawked from the radio on Eddie's belt. "Eddie, Eddie." He pressed the button. "I see it. Get security." People ran up from the beach, pointing as if they'd practiced the drill. "Look, up in the sky, an amusement ride. It's turned evil." Eddie grabbed his cane and clomped to the safety fence around the platform base, his wad of keys jangling against his hip. His heart was racing. Freddy's Freefall was supposed to drop 2 carts in a stomach-churning descent, only to be halted at the last instant by a rush of hydraulic air. How did one of the carts loose like that? It was tilted a few feet below the upper platform, as if it had started downward and changed its mind and just stopped. Eddie reached the gate and had to catch his breath. Dominguez came running and nearly banged into him. "Listen to me," Eddie said, grabbing Dominguez by the shoulders. His grip was tight. Dominguez made a pained face. "Listen to me. What's up there? Who's up there?" "Willie." "Okay, he must have hit the emergency stop. That's why the cart's hanging. Get up the ladder and tell Willie to manually release the safety restraint so those people can get out, okay? It's on the back of the cart, so you're going to have to hold him while he leans out there, okay? Then the two of yous now, got it? You got it? The 2 of yous, get them out. One holds the other. Got it? Got it?" Dominguez nodded quickly. "Then send that damn cart down so we can figure out what happened." Eddie's heart was pounding. Although his park had been free of any major accidents, he knew the horror stories of his business. Once in Brighton, a bolt unfastened on a gondola ride, and 2 people fell to their death. Another came in Wonderland Park. A man had tried to walk across a roller coaster track. He fell through and he got stuck beneath his armpits. He was wedged in screaming, and the cars came running towards him, and well, that was the worst. Eddie pushed that from his mind. There were people all around him now, hands over their mouths, watching Dominguez climb the ladder. Eddie tried to remember the inside of Freddy's Freefall. Engine, cylinders, hydraulics, seals, cables. How the fuck does a cart come loose? He followed the ride visually from the 4 frightened people at the top, down the towering shaft into the base. Engine, cylinder, hydraulics, seals, cables. Dominguez reached the upper platform. He did as Eddie told him, holding Willie as Willie leaned towards the back of the car to release the restraint. One of the female riders lunged for Willie and nearly pulled him off the platform. The crowd gasped. "Wait," Eddie said to himself. Willie tried again. This time he popped the safety release. "Cable," Eddie mumbled. The bar lifted and the crowd went, "Ah." The riders were quickly pulled to the platform. The cable is unravelling, and Eddie was right. Inside of the base of Freddy's Freefall, hidden from view, the cable that lifted cart number 2 had in the last few months been scraping against a locked pulley. Because it was locked, the pulley had gradually ripped the cable's steel wires, as if husking an ear of corn, until they were nearly severed. Nobody noticed. How could they notice? Only someone who'd crawled inside the mechanism would have seen the unlikely cause of the problem. The pulley was wedged by a small object that must have fallen through the opening at a most precise moment. A car key. "Don't release the cart," Eddie yelled. He waved his arms. "Hey, hey, it's the cable. Don't release the cart. It'll snap." The crowd drowned him out. It cheered wildly as Willie and Dominguez unloaded the final rider. All four were safe. They hugged atop the platform. "Dom, Willie," Eddie yelled. Somebody banged against his waist, knocking his walkie-talkie to the ground. Eddie bent to get it, and Willie went to the controls. He put his finger on the green button. Eddie looked up. "No, no, 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 don't." Eddie turned to the crowd. "Get back." Something in Eddie's voice must have caught the people's attention. They stopped cheering and began to scatter backwards. An opening cleared around the bottom of Freddie's free fall, and Eddie saw the last face of his life. She was sprawled upon the ride's metal base, as if somebody had knocked her onto it, her nose running, tears filling her eyes. The little girl with the pipe cleaner animal. Amy? Annie? "Mum, Ma, Mum, Mum," she heaved almost rhythmically, her body frozen in the paralysis of a crying child. "Mum, Ma, Mum, Ma." Eddie's eyes shot to the carts. Did he have time? Her to the carts. Whoomp. Too late. The carts were dropping. Jesus, he released the brake. And for Eddie, everything slipped into the water in motion. He dropped his cane and he pushed off on his bad leg, and he felt a shot of pain that almost knocked him down to his knees. A big step, another step. Inside the shaft of Freddie's free fall, the cable snapped as the final thread and ripped across the hydraulic line. Cart number 2 was in a dead drop now. Nothing left to stop it. A boulder off a cliff. In these final moments, Eddie seemed to hear the whole world. Distant screaming, waves, music, a rush of wind, a low, loud, ugly sound that he realised was his own voice blasting through his chest. The little girl raised her arms. Eddie lunged. His bad leg buckled. He half flew, half stumbled towards her, landing on the metal platform, which ripped through his shirt and split open his skin just beneath the patch that read Eddie and maintenance. He felt 2 hands in his own, 2 small hands. A stunning impact, a blinding flash of light, and then nothing. Okay, so that's chapter 1. Oh God, the hair. Why do I do these things to myself? It's a bit better. No, it's no better. I'm lying to myself. Anyway, if you've got a concussion and 2 broken ribs, that will possibly put you to sleep. Maybe not. We'll see. The book itself only goes for about an hour and a half. So some point when you're bored and you want to get into a good book, this is like my absolute favourite book. So, yeah, just thought I'd share it with you because you're injured. So, yeah, this is me. See ya.